again, I'm back here talking about Destiny 2 again. It's not the intent to keep talking about Destiny, but that is what I keep ending up talking about, and that's just what we're going to keep doing. And so today I'm sort of talking about, I wouldn't call what I'm discussing here a sort of a hot topic, but just a kind of something that's been brought by a few other people on YouTube, such as Datto and SkillUp, in talking about how the difficulty of Destiny is kind of too easy. Like, the general difficulty of core content is kind of too easy, and it's contrasted heavily by endgame content like Nightfalls and Master difficulty raids, which are obviously difficult just generally, but they obviously have mechanics and things in them that are different, that kind of restrict how you play them at the same time. So there's multiple different layers of like difficulty here, and I won't really go into it too much. But for a while, I felt that rewards from various sources are kind of too easy to acquire. But I think that maybe could be contributed to, in part to the fact that the game has kind of been quite easy, so it kind of feels like we're getting more stuff more often, but it could be just that, in general, the game's pretty easy. So, I'll leave a link in the description to those other sort of videos from Datto. SkillUp, it was his review for Witch Queen, and he sort of goes into it. It's a really good review, and same with Datto's video, very, very, worth checking out for sure. But first I wanted to sort of give a bit of context to this. So, where this a lot of this argument sort of discussion is coming from is the legendary campaign that came with Witch Queen, which I believe delivered like a true Destiny experience, where it was difficult but yet rewarding, and you really felt like the game was like a proper test. It was, for a fan and for many players like myself, it was like the way to play Witch Queen, and I'm so glad I played it like it on the first run through, because the thing that I would typically do is, I usually end up being underleveled for a lot of the Destiny campaigns anyway, because of the way they sort of structure, at least in the most recent years. But I would have been like, oh, I'll play the kind of game on normal first, then I'll go for hard. And I decided to do I'll say the other way around. I probably won't play it on classic, but I decided to do it this way, and it was like, it obviously took longer to complete, but it really made this campaign feel a lot more interesting, and it not only was the rewards like, getting high level stuff and, and completing the campaign, things like that, but it was the story and the way everything came together just, delivered this really true, like, when they said it was the definitive Destiny campaign, like, they really meant it. And I will say hats off to Bungie for the quality of the campaign and how everything was balanced. But what that kind of did, obviously, it has this, like, difficulty, but it's a different kind of difficulty that we haven't really seen yet. In that, like, there weren't any champions in there. We had like a new enemy type in the Lucent Hive, specifically the Light-Bearing Hive, that obviously had, the supers, and you had the Titan being the Sentinel, the Knight being the Sentinel Titan, was it the Acolyte, I think? The Acolyte was the Blade Barrage Hunter, and the Wizard was the Hive, the Wizard was the Warlock, Arc Warlock with Stormtrance, and they each attacked in different ways, and they employed abilities that we've been using for years against us, which really kind of changed how you played, and it affected you, because they weren't just damaging you. It was like you would get suppressed by the grenade from the Titan, and there would be a grenade thrown at you, and it would be one of our grenades, one of the Seeking Swarm grenade from the solo subclass. And the way they make you play is like really different to how we've been playing so far. And just the general consistent difficulty of that whole campaign was paced really well, it was balanced really well, and you didn't even have to kind of spend a while leveling up, because of the way that the game was, sort of structured. But what I remember thinking when I was playing through it was that, because of, like, you have to go to the, bit of spoilers, but you have to go to the Altar of Reflection at certain intervals in the campaign, and that particular sort of section of the game, they're not like classified as campaign missions, so the difficulty of them is a lot easier compared to the legendary missions. And I remember thinking, I was like, I kind of wish I could just play these on that difficulty, because I was going in there and I was melting everything, and I was like, but then you jump back into a mission, and I'm like having to like take time, take cover, but not on like a Grandmaster Nightfall level, on like a more of a traditional, like just a well-designed level. And it was like, why can't I play Altar of Reflection like that? Why can't the game, why can't I be tested more like how the campaign had been doing up to that point? And as I said, like, one of the best parts about this whole challenge was that it wasn't with the champions where you're like, limited in your loadouts, and every season the kind of weapons that you have to use and things you have to use change. It was like fully just skill, and taking your time and eliminating priority targets and working your way through and being aware of what enemies you're fighting and where they are and what they're attacking and where to move between cover. And what it also did was it also put an emphasis on the kind of build crafting side of Destiny, where it was like, what are you going to use? Now, when I played the campaign, the legendary campaign, I didn't really, I modified my subclass a little bit because it was new, and I think I was using Galahorn for the first couple of missions, and I used the glaive for most of the sort of campaign. But I never really spent a while like putting together a build, and obviously I think that was the intent, but it was a place where it's like I think I even went and tested the build out in one of the missions because I was like, this is a place that I know I'm not going to have any like huge restrictions. The game's going to be difficult, and I'm going to get to test how good a build is and how well I can implement that. And so to get to the point I was sort of alluding to there about champions, and it's the one thing that Datto mentions in his video, and it's very much worth checking out with his and SkillUp's review of Witch Queen. But the champions are, I think, one of the core issues with endgame content right now. It's not so much the way that they've got a different type of enemy. I think that, and it was when they came out with Shadowkeep, they were a good implementation because it was, getting you to fight a different way. It wasn't just, artificially scaling up difficulty. It was like, no, these are enemies that have different attributes, and, like, this enemy's going to do a ton of damage. This one can regen its health. You have to keep laying into it with damage, and this one's going to put up a shield and regen its health. And so you fight them in different ways, but you don't really fight them in any massive way. You just put on a mod and you just shoot them, kind of thing. And there's not like it was interesting at the time, and I still think the idea is interesting. But I think they need to remove the requirement of, oh, you need to use this weapon type this season, and the fact that it changed every season. Like I think like one season we had unstoppable sidearm, and it was like, I understand they're trying to rotate through different weapons, but it's like, no offense, but I pretty much never use sidearms, and I don't really care for sidearms, but I have sometimes used them, and there's actually one sidearm this season in particular that I think it's the Vice sidearm that drops in the world. That's one that I'm looking at, and I'm like, I think I've got a subsistence rampage. Actually, I think it was sold by the gunsmith. I haven't properly tested yet, but it was one sidearm that I wanted to test out a while back, and I'm glad it's been sort of brought back or reprised or whatever. And it's like, that's me choosing. That's my choice. I'm kind of, looking into it. And that's how the game should be. And the game should incentivize ways to win. I think that's how the seasonal aspect mostly works. But with champions in particular, you're really kind of pushed into specific weapon types every season. And 3 months is a long time. If it was every week, I think, you could argue that's not too bad. But every season is just kind of, it's a long time, especially with Season of the Lost, which was 6 months as well. I've got a few examples here that, this season Overload is on Void Grenades and Auto Rifles and SMGs, and I think there might be one more, I can't remember. But it's like, so if you want to do Overload, you're having to fight with those things, and Unstoppable is on Glaives, Hand Cannons, and Solar Melees. And again, it's like, it's cool that, you can tell that there's some incentive, they're like being, oh, you might want to use Solar, but the weird thing is that no one wants to use Solar right now unless it's PvP, because Void and Stasis are really customizable and have so much build potential. So telling players to go and check out Solar and Arc, it's kind of like, I get why. Again, it's like, I understand they want to still use it, but even one of the developers said they don't want you to think that they're terrible, but they want you to see that there's clearly this new system is better. And they've proven that with Stasis, and they've proven it again with Void 3.0, so I'm just like, why push people to a subclass that is inherently going to be underpowered, not have the same functionality, customizability, So I get it, but I just think there's a little bit of imbalance there, and I just think I don't know why. And again, it's a problem with the champions. Again, as I said, you can argue that incentivizes experimentation, but it's limiting. It's from a system that was, from 2 years ago, that worked back then. Actually, I say 2 years, 2.5 years, it pretty much is. It worked back then, but I just don't think it works as well now. And, they're talking about build crafting, and they want you to create builds and experiment with things, but it's like, too often, like, I've thought about soloing Nightfalls. I thought that would be a fun challenge, and I can't do it. Obviously, Adept is the base difficulty, Hero is the slightly higher one, and Legend is the one that, there's no matchmaking on. So I was like, okay, so this is the way that, I wish you could choose whether you have matchmaking on or off. I don't know why. At least for, like, I thought it'd be cool to, like, if you want to just go and farm a strike for enemy kills, I don't want to join other people's games and ruin, if they want to just play through the strike. I want to go in and farm it myself. I wish you could load in solo. But yeah, for Legend Nightfalls, it's like, I've gone like, oh yeah, that'd be a cool challenge, but there's only one Nightfall strike per week. So I have to pick from that one, it's just that one, and then it's like, oh, this is anti-barrier and unstoppable, and it's like, oh, but I wanted to use my auto rifle this season to test out the Nightfall. Oh, but I can't because I need to use something for overload. Sorry, I need to use something for anti-barrier, and obviously there's no overload, so I have to swap out my weapon. And then I go, oh, there's match game on too. All right, so I can't even use that because now I need to use this specific element. And maybe I'm making it sound worse than it is because there are a ton of weapons and a ton of different options that you can have, but it kind of pushes me away from even thinking about trying it because I just don't. I want to play it my way and I want to test out different things. And if they do that, like I can see myself being like, oh, it would be cool to just run challenges in Destiny. Can I beat this Nightfall Strike on Legend with just one sidearm? Or 3 shotguns. Those are the things, and they're all player-made challenges. They're not customizable. But I think those challenges you could literally implement. You could reduce the requirements, and Bungie could add unique challenges for different activities every season. That's I don't know, beat this Nightfall with 3 shotguns and you get an emblem or something like that. I know that's that's going off on another topic, but that's the kind of thing that if they just take away these restrictions, they can then add in more complexity to things, which makes hopefully will make people want to test out different builds, and that's what the seasonal artifact can do. The artifact can incentivize different things. Like they have rocket launcher scavenger this season on there, so rather than spending 4 or 5 energy on it, like I think it currently is, or like it usually is, you can just spend 1 energy because it's the artifact mod, which obviously incentivizes using that and gives you more abilities, on leg armor outside of that. And so what they're doing there is they are essentially saying, oh, we're featuring rocket launchers this season a little bit here, and obviously Glaive's got some mods, and so they already do things like this, and they're useful. And the best part about this season is that they've started allowing us to unlock every single mod on the artifact, which is probably low-key my favorite change with this season, because it's so nice to have this thing to unlock, this thing to work towards and fully complete, and know that I have 25 potential mods, some of which are featured, some of which are existing mods with a cheaper cost, but that in turn means I can look at the artifact or I can look at my mods and I have more choice through how I can, and buildcraft. And so clearly they're moving in a direction to offer, more buildcrafting potential. But the problem is obviously, as I said, with champions it's too restrictive, and they do add mechanical complexity, I think a bit of that to the combat and the sandbox, but they need to take away some of that, restrictive nature of them, because it's kind of, I think it's working against some of the other goals that they seem to be going with. As I said, with something like match game, I don't think it's too bad. I like it when you're playing with other people, because I think it's cool to have that coordination of oh, who's gonna take out arc shield? Oh, you've got the arc shield, okay, you take that. But I do think even there's a little bit of restriction, in the sense that it kind of pushes you to be oh, maybe I'll use Hardlight, Borealis or Dead Messenger, which is the new grenade launcher, and it's so you kind of match game is a less egregious version of the champion mod system, but I think both of them in combination in particular is not very good. But on the point of build crafting, obviously while that's endgame content we're talking about, you can take it on the flip side, where the core, as I said at the beginning, the core combat and difficulty, the default difficulty of Destiny is too easy. Endgame content is restrictive, but core content is just you just steamroll through everything. Strikes, patrol, seasonal content in particular, it's all way easier. And the thing is that to me, the legendary campaign proves that when Destiny has more difficulty to it, it's more enjoyable. Now, obviously, not everyone's going to feel that way, but I think there's a difference between the legendary campaign even and what we have in patrol. It's so bored, it's so uninteresting, and I think to me I think that, as I said, it was Witch Queen makes the game feel like a new game. I'll get more to that particular point in a bit later. And obviously, difficulty can't be, you can't have every activity be legendary, or I'm not talking about I don't want the game to become Grandmaster difficulty, because that would be terrible. But I do think that there needs to be a massive rebalancing with content in not only enemies you fight, but the number of enemies, the shields they have, and how difficult it is in general, because we're just, so many players are steamrolling, and even if you haven't even got a build set up, you are steamrolling. And obviously I mentioned earlier about rewards being too difficult to acquire. I think some of that, if you add more difficulty to the game, you kind of make the reward feel a little bit more earned, you kind of make it feel maybe a little bit more special. And I think that, in turn, might alleviate some of the, issues I've sort of had there. But I think to me it's a general fact that the game should be more difficult. And I think some of this does cross over into leveling, because of course, I think the level can still be there, but obviously, I don't know if they're going to scrap leveling eventually, or if they're going to go different ways. But obviously, leveling is a part of the kind of like, your level determines the difficulty of content. But I think you can tune them. I think it just needs a massive pass, like, game wide to sort of cover that. Because, to take a destination, for example, like, when Savathun's Throne World isn't that much more threatening than the Cosmodrome, I think there's a problem, because it's Savathun's Throne World. It should be like, you know, she's literally got an army. Like, you almost feel like that's not really enforced too much in the public zones and everything. But yeah, as I was saying before, obviously the games, I think, is too easy, and the build crafting, it really does show. And we saw that with Stasis. When Stasis was released, we saw like how potent it could be, particularly in PvE as well as PvP. At launch it was pretty strong in PvP, and obviously it's been tuned down since. But Stasis, even today, has a lot of potency, and there's a lot of viability and a lot of great builds you can do with it. And obviously Year 4 sort of helped Stasis, but it also helped introduce new builds across all subclasses and abilities. And Void 3.0 is like the next step in that process. And again, it's great. It's great seeing all these different builds and the different keywords and verbs that they're using. But when you're playing core content that you're going to play every single day, you're just melting enemies. And that's even present in Witch Queen's 6-player activity called Wellspring. Like, it's an okay activity, I think, mostly, but everything just dies super quick. There's not really any element of like, I don't necessarily think Destiny needs to be like the most tactical shooter where you're taking cover all the time, but I think Destiny does have a place. It is an FPS at the end of the day, and it probably should have difficulty. It's not just loaded up to be Space Wizards, 24/7 kind of thing. You want to have, if you heard that, by the way, that was my laptop notifying me as notification. So if you heard that sound, that's there. Anyway, we do this live. Yeah, so if you play Wellspring, you've probably seen it. Enemies just explode into like void energy, and they just dissipate out of existence. And PsiOps Battlegrounds is kind of the same, and pretty much all of last year's seasonal content is the same as well. And I think, like, I tried soloing a dungeon, which I've done before, and I think I tried Grasp of Aris in particular. I tried a Graviton Lance. What's the word for it? Graviton. I was using the volatile rounds on Graviton Lance, and just it was cool. But I will say, in that dungeon, I don't think it works too well, because in that first particular encounter, there's a lot of close quarters areas. I think it'll probably work better in the last encounter. But that was an interesting challenge. But of course, dungeons aren't designed to be repeatable necessarily, like, or run day to day like strikes and seasonal activities. They are literally, they've got modifiers and they rotate daily. Like, there's an incentivization to be like, this is what you play every day. I guarantee, if Guardian Games doesn't change, we're probably going to end up back in strikes again. Like, it's going to be that kind of thing. That, same with Crucible, Gambit. That's how they're designed. They're meant to be replayed. And yeah, and so to sort of get back to, I mentioned it briefly, was the fact that Witch Queen making Destiny feel new again. And I think that was partly down to the difficulty. And the one thing that I found disappointing was that, like, once I finished the campaign, Destiny sort of just carried on feeling the same as it had, before Witch Queen. Like, obviously there was a new vibe to it because of all the new orbit music, new director, and quests, different weapons we're using. Void 3.0. There are elements, of course, that adds, that kind of give it some level of like, oh, this is new kind of thing. I can tell this is new, but the game doesn't feel the new kind of game feel that it did with the Witch Queen campaign. And I thought, I was like, I mean, I'm glad SkillUp mentions it in his own review, because I thought I was crazy when I was playing. I was like, this really feels like a new game, and I was like, maybe I'm just giving it too much credit, but like, no, it genuinely did. And it's down to the legendary campaign and its mission design and the difficulty balancing and the production value with all its the cutscenes, the puzzles, the set pieces. And it really did. The game felt fresh, it felt new, it felt like I was playing something different. Like, it was really, really great. And as I said, I think it sucks that I have these really positive feelings that were like, holy shit, like that. And I said, it's a feeling I've not had in a while. And then I finish the campaign and everything just kind of returns back to normal. And even the raid, by the way, the raid is one part that also makes it feel like this game is new. How different the environments are in the raid compared to like everything else in the game is incredible. And it helps make the game feel new. But then you get back to your standard stuff, like your core combat and the daily and weekly rituals, it feels exactly the same. It feels, and as I said, it's not just, Strikes and PvE, you've got Gambits in a weird spot. Crucible obviously is going to be getting some updates, but that's, long awaited. Um, and so yeah, even the new stuff like seasonal content, even if it's from this new era of the game, like year 5, it still suffers, I think, from, very similar problems to the rest of the game. And as I said, Legendary Campaign just gave the difficulty, it had like a different combat flow, and as I said, paired with everything together, it just felt fresh, felt new again. And I think crafting has a part to playing this too. I think crafting had the potential to freshen up the game on a day-to-day basis again. But yeah, I think it's arguably failed at doing that, and it's already slated that we're gonna get some changes next season, and Bungie looking at other things, and it's like I just wish that system had not launched the way it did, and that we had got something a bit more complete that felt like it fit in the game more. Now, I will say, I think there is a place for crafting, of course, and I've made a video on that, which you can check out. But yeah, I just think that there's some weirdness there, and I think that contributed to that new game feeling, but we're still not fully there yet. Um, and it's interesting because I was one of the people that had been saying that Witch Queen, or like Destiny 2 currently, is in the best place it's been, and I think quality wise, I think you could argue that's the case. But Skillet made a really good point that I think, yeah, he's probably right. In that, while many people are saying that the game's the best state it's been in, including myself, as Skillet says, the game's suffering from a number of core issues like the difficulty in a Crucible, Gambit, whatever. It's suffering from all these issues that weren't really present with Taken King and Forsaken, because they basically nailed everything. Now, I don't fully agree with the Forsaken part. I think there's still some leftover oddities from year 1, and I think that there still are, both back in Forsaken and even now. But he's right in saying that the game was in a much more coherent spot, and where pretty much every single part of the game had received some kind of update or revitalization that, of course, we didn't really get with Beyond Light or Shadowkeep, and even with Witch Queen. So, and I thought it was a really good point. So it's like, yeah, the game's good at the moment, but it's still, it's missing something. It's like the Bungie are adding stuff, but they're not fully rounding it off, kind of thing. And yeah, and I think, yeah, when the game's so easy and lots of parts still work, you sort of realize, like, oh, Destiny is still kind of Destiny, and there's a lot of issues that they need to work through, and it's a shame, because as I said, I think Witch Queen is in itself a great expansion, and I think it's the best it's definitely the best campaign they've made, and and as I said, I think it's going to be the anchor at which we hopefully pivot around from now in terms of difficulty. I hope it's going to be a statement. I hope most of the player base likes that too. But yeah, just to I think sort of wrap everything up. I think while people might, if they do increase the difficulty, I think some people will probably, have an issue with it, or they'll struggle. But I think for the health of the game, it will be better. Both in terms of just general difficulty, but also encounter design and things that are more interesting and fun. As I said, the Lucent Hive in combat, their lethality was great. And because you didn't need any mods to fight them, it was your skill, it was your awareness, and it was you versus them. There wasn't any kind of and if you were fighting against them later on in the end game, it's more like it's you versus them, but it's also your build crafting and how are you going to fight them. What are you going to use against them to defend yourself. I will say just one thing while I remember. Skillup did mention about Void 3.0, that he's not a huge fan of it because, of course, the potency of it. But I think I think that goes hand in hand with his point that the game needs to be rebalanced so that stuff existing has a place, kind of thing. I just don't want to. I don't want to. Don't want to. Spread words that he hasn't properly said or to suggest he has said. But yeah, he's not a huge fan of Void 3. As I said, go and watch his video. His video is the thing you should listen to for his proper thoughts. I'm just paraphrasing. But yeah, so obviously, yeah, champions, with against Lucent Hive, you don't need things like to fight champions. And I think if Bungie really start to lean more into this challenge, they can push more build crafting options because they're actually going to feel relevant and impactful. Obviously, PvP, balance, that's kind of a separate thing. But if players feel like they have a lot of options at their disposal, that's really great. And I don't think you really, even in, we're talking about build crafting, but it's not like everyone needs to be like min-maxing to the absolute, to just like min-maxing like every stat and every mod. Because most players, I think, get along fine currently, and I think even with an uptick in difficulty, they will still get along fine. And if things like campaign has like an option where you can play on an easier difficulty, then that's great. It caters to both sides, and like they did with Witch Queen. And I think if Bungie really do this, I think you will start to see Destiny's potential come to life. I think more so than it potentially ever has before, and I think that's, at least in the PvE department, that's where the game's going to really hit its stride. And so yeah, I think for me, I'm hoping a lot of people are going to speak up about it. I hope a lot of people are going to discuss this, because I think this is a really important topic, and I hope it gets a lot of traction. And I hope we see Year 5 have a lot more freedom with build potential at the same time as kind of increasing the overall difficulty. And where we're seeing different players like create their own different builds, and the builds going hand in hand with their visual appearance, and so they're kind of creating like this truly like personalized character for themselves that they're coming on every day, every week to kind of like adjust slightly, equip certain mods and just really tweak their characters to be like that. And I think some of this can add more depth to various systems, which kind of extends the chase, because I think one thing that Destiny's lacking at the moment is that as I said, with rewards being pretty easy to get, I think it's sort of, there's an element where like everyone's so focused on like getting stats higher and like, oh, we want to get the best stat roll, and I think that's good, but again, that chase has been that chase for now 2.5 years, and I think we need a little bit more to kind of push people where it's like different armor has different value for different reasons, different things appeal to different players for different reasons. And I think we need more sustainable systems, I think, and I think with certain things they introduced, kind of, like for example transmog. It's like, well, now you don't need the original armor piece to look that way, so you don't need a good stat roll, and that you just pick whatever armor you've got, and it's like that's good for quality of life. But I also think that creates another issue. You're now cutting down the longevity of armor being relevant, and I know RNGs are just a weird thing anyway, but I think with buildcraft, if buildcrafting takes center stage a little bit more, I think more game systems can kind of run alongside it to really create and make the chase every day interesting, make the game interesting, fun to play, and challenging, and rewarding you with armor and weapons that actually add to your build, or make you go, oh, that sounds cool. Let me try that out for this other build. And one random idea I literally sort of thought about, obviously, we were talking about strikes before, and I was saying about how I want strikes to be doing more difficult. Some people might say that Nightfalls are the place to be the difficulty, but you don't really want to repeat the same strike over and over again. But one thing that I think could make Nightfalls a little bit more interesting, not necessarily to fix that problem, but I think to make just Nightfalls a bit more interesting, just in general, is to kind of just curate them a little bit more per season. Like because like one issue I've got currently is that like some strikes have all three shield types in them, but being Arc, Solar, Void, but it's not like that's a consistent. You're not going to have like 10 enemies with one, 10 enemies with another, 10 enemies with the other one. It's like 2 enemies with one, 23 enemies with the other one, and 5 with the other. And it's like, they don't tell you that. They tell you what shields you're going to fire, but they don't tell you how many are going to be there. I think cutting that down to just 2, one, it opens it up to a little bit more solo play, but it also makes it a bit easier. I think Grandmaster having all 3 shields, I think that's fine. That makes sense. You've got 3 players. Very few people are going to solo Grandmasters, and I don't really think it's going to change too much if they suddenly added a bit more shields. But then Grandmasters, that's a separate, conversation anyway. But on top of having different shields, on top of having like only 2 shields, I think they could rotate the elemental shields that certain strikes have, and as well maybe the enemies that you fight in the strike every season, and they could have some narrative tie-in as well, or some remix music. It's a lot of ideas, and so, maybe you can't do every strike, but maybe you could have like a couple of Nightfalls every season that are updated as like an alt variant. We used to have that in Destiny 1 with like how you would have like, not in the same way, but you would have Sepix Prime, and then you had Sepix Redux, which was the Rise of Iron version of it. And I think you could kind of do the same here. You could fight a Hive Ogre or something. You could do like the Grasp of Avarice dungeon boss almost, but on like the reverse side, how Sepix Prime that strikes works. I think things like that could sort of be nice, and it sort of revitalizes strikes a little bit for the Nightfall. But that's not really, doesn't really get at the problem, but I think it adds a little bit more curation to the challenges that you fight, and it's a bit more predictable, and gives a bit more freedom to build crafting. But yeah, primarily I think core combat, generally the main thing I'm getting at here is like the core combat. I think the core day-to-day sort of experience of Destiny needs to be more interesting, it needs to be more fun and challenging, and I think, especially with the builds that we're getting now, the game needs to understand that even if you're not fully investing into builds, a lot of players are just wrecking and just tearing through stuff in strikes and things like that. See, I don't really got much more to say. Yeah, my hope is just we get, each season this year. I hope it's something Bungie are going to listen to, and or hope they recognize, and that each season and the game is going to get more difficult with a retuning to pretty much all the content and destinations. I didn't mention it, but I think Patrol is a bit of a missed opportunity here in the not everyone loves Patrol, but there were things like Escalation Protocol, which had its own issues with matchmaking, things like that. But those activities were really great, and having open world events, I think, was a unique thing for Destiny. And I'm like, not many games do this. I'm like, you could, well, to be fair, not many games are like Destiny, but there's a lot of potential there. And I'm just like, people have talked about like world tiers, sort of division style in Destiny, and I don't know if they would do it in that sense, but something of the kind where it's like, like heroic public events are genuinely hard, and you can actually play them, and you get like upgrade resources, materials, and there's so much that they can do. And I'm just like, I guess this is why they're thinking of sticking with Destiny 2 for the long haul, because to be fair, there's so much that can be done. But I will say that one thing that's disappointing is that it feels like we're often waiting for a lot of these things. Like, getting new things and being excited is great, but when you sort of feel like the rest of the game is still in this weird, like, year 2, year 3, maybe even year 1 state, I think it makes things a little bit weird, and I hope that that's something that we can see a quicker development cycle of keeping the game up to date overall. It's like, for example, Gambit you can focus, engrams from the Drifter currently, but you can't do that with Strikes and Crucible yet, So it's that kind of thing, which I don't think it's a terrible problem. Like, it doesn't bother me massively, but it's like, I wish the game was more on par with kind of, I don't think that's too bad with things like Solar, and Arc not being 3.0 yet, because something like Void 3.0 is a pretty big thing that's got a lot of potential in itself. So even though 2 other subclasses sit and aren't updated yet, they still have, use where, here and there. But Void has so many different possibilities that you kind of don't necessarily. It's okay to go without them for a little bit. And I said they're doing them every season this year. I assume the next 2 seasons. But yeah, I am going to stop rambling now, as for this video has actually been about an extra 10 minutes longer than I intended. But it's a really interesting topic, I think, and I just really, like, it actually excites me. I'm like, holy shit, if we can get a Destiny where we're getting more difficult content, not just in general, just like the day-to-day, where it actually is, like, things are paced better, and we're actually having to, like, think about, like, oh, what can I do to deal more damage? What can I do to, with crowd control, there's so many different things we have. And as I said, a lot of weapon perks currently are damage based, and I'm just like, if we get the game being more difficult with a little bit more enemy density, I hope we move away from, just having more damage. Like, I want things that are like AOE, kind of like Dragonfly, but things like that, and Headstone, because I just don't think damage based, like, we've got like 10 damage based perks or something in the game. I'm just like, we're getting a different way to proc damage nearly every season, and I'm just like, I don't think we need this, It's interesting for builds, but it's so simple. It's like, I'll do this thing, get more damage on the weapon, and I hope that that's something we move away from. That then, as I said, if you have more enemies, you might want to have something like crowd control. Maybe you want something that stuns, like, or like freezes, like stasis. There's so many different possibilities, and the difficulty of the game increasing, I think, makes those possibilities worthy. And just makes you think about builds. What's the best build for the strike? What's this what's the challenge I can do for this? And I think that hopefully is the direction we're moving in. As I said, I'll link Dato's video and Skillet's video in the description, both worth checking out. And if you want to hear more of my crafting thoughts, I'll leave a link to that in the description as well. But for now, I'm going to stop rambling, and I'll let you all go. And I hope you have a good day. I hope you're enjoying Destiny, or whatever games you're playing. Hopefully, as I said, hopefully I'll be back soon with more than just Destiny talk, because that's what I got planned. It's just, I'm terrible at not talking about Destiny. I mean, most people know me for Destiny, so, yeah. Hope you have a good one, and, I'll see you later. So, ciao, ciao, ciao.